All right, well, welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon to you, and thank you for joining this month's Healthy Native Youth Community of Practice call. We are so glad that you are here to talk and share with us on how we can build community with youth. I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then we will start with the blessing before our guest speakers introduce themselves. So Keshi, Kotalea, Ho Amanda Jachu Kakuska Lechina, Ho Ibachina Shiwi, Diane Chemakwe, Hom Hota Deakona Jachu Lechina Ke, Hom Hota Tlashi Deakona Yawaki Letnash or Lechina Ke, Hom Tsita Dona Chatwe, Hom Dachu Chemakwe an Tsita that Dachu Kakuska that Rogi Let Nachinake Elakwa. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Amanda Jachu Kakuska. I'm from the Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico. My grandma was a Jachu, my great grandma was a Yawaki, and my mother is the child of the Turkey clan. My German paternal grandparents are the Kakuska and the Rogi. I am also Ask Auntie from We Are Natives Q&A service, and I use she and her pronouns. And I am the host for the Healthy Native Youth Community of Practice calls. So we do want to just say a quick thank you, give a shout out to our funders, IHS and Secretary Minority AIDS Initiative Fund. We just love the work that we do, so thank you for the funds for our programming. And we like to ground each call that may or may not be familiar to folks on the call. Traditionally, when we are called together, we begin our time in gratitude for the gifts that we are given, and in reciprocity, we share them with each other freely. So this morning, I will ask folks to take a moment of silence. You can offer your gratitude in a way that is familiar to you. And if it's not, you can choose to sit in silence, close your eyes, take deep breaths as you set an intention for being in community today. So we'll go ahead and take a moment of silence, and then I'll call you back to the space. Elakwa. So thank you for taking the moment to offer your gratitude or set your intention for today. We also like to ground each call with a traditional teaching, and this one happens to be for Karen. And I won't steal her thunder, but I heard she loves the cosmos and she loves rainbows. So I put this graphic up. This is a Nootka song to bring fair weather. You whose day it is, make it beautiful. Get your rainbow colors so it will be beautiful. It's also a nice reminder that we can help sing the songs that bring fair weather to our children, as well as play a role in making beautiful moments for ourselves and for our relatives. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Karen and Nicole to introduce themselves before we get started.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Dean, and I'm a member of the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, and I have the great honor of serving the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board as the Director of Human Resources, and I'm one of the speakers that that we're having here today. So I'm so happy to be here.
And hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Trevino, and I'm a consultant working with the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. I'm excited to talk a little bit today about our work on disability adaptations. Yeah, I love family time. The change in seasons is always a good reminder to connect with your family. So that's what's on my mind today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Karen and Nicole. So just a quick note on logistics. We just love seeing all of your faces, so thank you. We respect Zoom fatigue, however, so if you need to take a moment, please do. Just as a heads up, due to the board's IT security protocols, AI note taker is disabled. Alternatively, you could use the Zoom closed captioning. We also record these community of practice sessions, which we do upload to the resource library on Healthy Native Youth, and then we put them on YouTube, which also has closed captioning too. So you will notice throughout the slides that we have these great little Indigi icons. If you see the male or female elder in the top right corner of your slide, that means that we are modeling an activity or a skill that you can then use with your youth. The cedar hat is where we are sharing strategy. The multicolored corn is a time when we can think about being Two-Spirit LGBTQ inclusive. And then the medicine shaker is us sharing our wisdom or knowledge with each other. And again, we just want to welcome you. If it's your first time or I see some familiar faces on, thank you for joining us as we talk about how to build community with youth. Just to get familiar with the chat, if you want to start writing your name, your tribes and or organization, your pronouns if you're comfortable, and then what are you hoping to learn today? And we use the chat a lot. This group happens to be super chatty. So we encourage side conversations, we encourage networking. This is your space. So if you're looking to create partnerships, you can privately message folks or you can message folks on here as well. But this is your community, so please feel free to just chat it up. And then while folks are doing that, I'll just reinforce the importance of creating spaces. We talk about it often, but just a reminder, if you don't have group agreements set with youth, Taylor, my awesome co-host, is going to put a link into the chat for you. It comes from Native Stand. And then if you're looking to create digital learning agreements with your youth or the youth who are in your home, Common Sense Media is a really great resource that you can fill in together, post on the fridge or post on the wall. But I'll have Taylor put those links in the chat. And then we do have objectives just to kind of measure our learning. So by the end of today's session, you will be able to learn about the key terms and concepts of neurodiversity. You'll be able to gain tips for accommodating and adapting your programs for youth with neurodiversity or disability. And then our map for today, Karen is going to kick it off giving us the 101 on neurodiversity, offering some key terms and definitions. She'll provide context on the nuances of culture, trauma, and how colonialism plays a role, and then how we can help build inclusive spaces for our Native youth. Specifically, she'll be sharing strategies for inclusivity. And then we will take a wellness moment together, and I'll lead you on a quick movement activity. Not quick in movement, but quick in time. And then next, Nicole, who is our adaptation guru, is going to share the process that she's been using to make inclusive program adaptations for neurodivergent and disabled youth. She's going to ask us to think about why we should adapt our programming, and she's going to ask us to share examples that we've used or something that we would like to use to create an inclusive environment for all youth. So just to get you thinking about it. And then lastly, we'll save some time for folks to unmute your lines and ask questions, share at the end of the call. So thank you again for being here, and I will go ahead and pass it over to Karen.
Thanks again, Amanda. Well, just want to start by saying how grateful I am to be here speaking with all of you. I've loved seeing the introductions in the chat, just seeing a little bit about who's here and the roles that you have and the folks that you serve. So I was asked to come and speak with you today about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's something that impacts me professionally as well as personally. As a HR professional, there's a lot of folks that we work with in our organization that might have differing needs or different ways about going doing things. But I'll also just start by saying that I'm a mom of a son who is on the autism spectrum, and I'm also a neurodivergent person myself. So, hoping to shine a light today on some of the basics of these concepts. For some of you, this might be brand new stuff. For others, this might be a lot of stuff you are possibly well familiar with, but hopefully each of you will find something you can learn from and take away today. So next slide, please. So to get things kind of started out with a good framework, I want to highlight a couple of the key terms that come into play when we're talking about neurodiversity in general. So to start out with, neurodiversity refers to the idea that we have different ways of thinking and different ways that our brains are structured in general. From that flows a couple of different terms. So someone who is neurodivergent is someone who has a brain that essentially functions differently from what you might call the societal norm, which I'll just kind of pause and say normal is subjective and slightly a myth, but it's also a concept that we generally accept anyway. Someone who's neurotypical is arguably the opposite of that, and that is someone whose brain functions more or less how you would expect, or maybe in the predominant sort of way in our society. A group of people that has both neurodivergent people and neurotypical people is considered neurodiverse, just in the same way that if you were to have a group with people that represented a variety of different sorts of genders or ages or races or anything like that is considered diverse. So is having a group of people with different brain structures and behavioral differences. And then probably one of my favorite parts of this is just the neurodiversity movement. It's a movement that is kind of rooted similarly in other civil rights movements and advocacy work that has folks who themselves identify as neurodivergent, and perhaps the people who know and love those folks as well, advocating for themselves and others to just really improve their ability to function in society, whether that's structurally in the way that environments are designed, or emotionally and socially in the way that they're accepted and interacted with other folks. Slide, please. Okay, so when I'm talking about neurodiversity, I kind of want to just set the stage for, generally speaking, what I'm referring to. It's a large umbrella, okay? There's a lot of stuff that goes into this. There's a number of different terms. I've got them clustered in these nice little bubbles here. You can read them on the screen. But the idea is that all of these different things, including some that are not on here, make up what we conceive of as neurodiversity. So for example, we have things like autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, synesthesia, all of the the dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, and sensory processing disorder. So those are all considered just different ways of having different brain structures that impact behavior and the way that people move through the world. Next slide, please. So to recap, on the left, we have just a summary of some of those key terms that I went over a moment ago around the neurodiversity movement. And then we have some deeper dives in terms of the actual definitions of what those various neurodiverse conditions entail. I want to maybe just highlight that the things that I'm probably going to spend a little bit more time speaking to are autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That's not to be excluding of these other diagnoses, but given the length of time that we have here today, and just the way that things play out and the commonalities amongst them, you'll probably hear me referring a little bit more to those two. So I just want to mention that. There might be some things on this list that you haven't heard of or aren't quite familiar of, quite familiar with. But just please bear in mind that the rates of prevalence in population range anywhere from maybe 1 out of 100 folks to upwards of 1 in 10 by all current estimates. And so while these might be a little bit rare in theory, the odds that you know or love or even are someone who meets one of these labels is pretty decently high. So a couple quick things to highlight is that synesthesia it's one of the more intriguing ones to me. That's essentially where multiple senses get mixed together, or basically one sense will evoke another sense. And the most common representation you see of that one is when you have folks that maybe hear something and then see a color that's associated with it. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. All right, well, one of the things that I want y'all to take home with you today is the notion that being neurodiverse or neurodiversity and having a disability, they're not necessarily the same thing. They are two separate entities that may overlap. And the reason I think that that's really important to acknowledge is because there's the nuance of being strength-based when you're talking about folks with these various conditions. And much in the same way that we view these differences as potentially creating differences in how folks interact in their environment and what their needs are, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to impair them from living a full and complete life. That being said, please bear in mind that each person who has one of these labels, they might have the same set of symptoms or the same diagnosis, but one individual might consider themselves disabled and another individual may not. It's really subjective. And it's something to just keep in mind too when you're speaking with individuals that have these conditions or when you're working with them, because essentially the bottom line is just because they have a neurodiverse condition doesn't mean that they are disabled or consider themselves disabled. That being said, when you're moving through the world in a different way, it's completely okay to understand that you might have different levels of supports and needs that go along with that. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff on this beautiful sort of slight medicine wheel-ish thing that we have going on here. And I want to talk a little bit about the common strengths, the common challenges, and then offering some solutions when we're really trying to get a sense of how to make folks feel included, how to build a better world for them, and how to come together as a community and really support them. So, for example, some of the strengths that you tend to find in folks that are neurodiverse, one of my favorites is they can be great storytellers. They tend to have really good oral comprehension. So doing things face to face, it can be really engaging and entertaining. They can be really creative and imaginative. And for example, that one of the more famous people who have autism is a woman named Temple Grandin. She actually wrote a book called Thinking in Pictures, and she's able to envision entire like three-dimensional spaces and design them in her head and then build them out in real life. And her particular thing that she focused on was building cattle holding apologies, I can't remember the exact word, but to have the cattle move through the facilities in a way that was gentle and it didn't stress them out. And she just could conceive of all of that within her head in like thinking in pictures. Other strengths that people who are neurodivergent tend to possess is that they tend to be very much outside of the box thinkers. They often are innovative and entrepreneurial. They also tend to be very, very empathetic with others. They recognize patterns. They might be good at math or have really strong attention to detail. One of the most common, I'll call it a stereotype of people that have autism are there's the movie that came out in the 80s with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise called Rain Man. And that individual was arguably an autistic savant, meaning that he had some genius abilities in a very specific area. And that included being able to memorize things and just really strong attention to detail with that regard. So those are just some of the common strengths that we find with folks that are neurodivergent. Some of the difficulties or challenges that they faced, sometimes taking things really literally, not being able to take in context that is flying under the radar, that's maybe in nonverbal cues, things like sarcasm, things like just even social context that might further inform the meaning of what's being said. They might struggle with following really lengthy instructions or filling out complicated forms. They might struggle with managing their money or their possessions or being organized. Sometimes they end up having information or sensory overload where there's so much going on in the environment that they either can't discern what's important and take in just those particular things they should focus in, or they might even become emotionally dysregulated because of all that sensory stuff that's going on, because it's just like being bombarded with just too many things all at once. Relatedly, that lends itself to potentially some emotional regulation issues where things that wouldn't necessarily bother or upset a neurotypical person might really be challenging and stressful. So, for example, environments like a grocery store where there's lots of lights and sounds and noises and people, or any sort of large social event, or maybe just a very big public space like a theme park or a parade or things like that. Other difficulties, one that I think I noticed with my son in particular, is that there is sometimes a challenge with what I'll call flexible thinking. Um, for example, if you were to say something like, you can't do that, maybe you're thinking you can't do that right now, or you can't do that until something else happens. But if you don't say that explicitly, they might interpret that as you can't do that forever and ever. And so it might greatly upset them, and they're not really able to always extrapolate on what's not being said. A big thing with some neurodiverse people is just even understanding social structure, social norms, hierarchy, perhaps respecting authority, arbitrarily even. Things like turn taking in conversation, those can really be difficult for neurodiverse individuals. There are a couple of other specific challenges that I'll refer to. One of them that's on our list here is called masking. So masking is essentially when a neurodivergent individual senses or perceives or somehow gets some sort of message that the way that they are, the way that they behave, the way that they present themselves isn't working for them. It's not getting them results that they feel good about. And they start to understand, well, gosh, if I just acted differently, if I maybe acted like the person I saw on the movie screen, or that individual that's in my class over there, if I just copied that or acted or pretended to be that way, then I would be treated better. And that is called masking. And it's something that often happens subconsciously. and is, for example, in individuals who don't receive a diagnosis until much later in life, it might be something that they didn't even realize they were doing, and they have to unlearn it or have it pointed out to them. And it can be a really scary thing, because what underscores that is the idea that who they are naturally, the way that they are, is not going to be accepted, and they need to expend the extra energy to behave differently in order to be accepted, in order to be treated the way that they want to be treated. So those are just some of the things that that are common amongst most neurodiverse individuals. And then the last area that I want to focus on is social stuff. So we're talking about, again, just interacting with peers, interacting with people that are in the community, family members. There might be a lot of one-sided conversations. Sometimes neurodiverse individuals will get really fixated on a particular topic, and they will want to chat your ear off about it, but they're not going to necessarily pick up on the notion that the thing that they're speaking about to that other person is not of interest to the other person, or that even if it is, they might lack that back and forth reciprocity in conversation. They may not ask questions. They might just essentially lecture the other person about it, which can be really hard, even if you are interested in the topic, but it's even harder if you're not. And it can ultimately end up being very kind of isolating, and cause people to maybe avoid neurodiverse individuals just because they don't want to get sucked into a conversation that they can't extract themselves from. They might have different interests than others socially. For example, they may not necessarily gravitate towards wanting to be in group activities or do the same kind of things that others do. So there's just a lot of different things that go on there. But essentially, what I want to kind of round that out with is just talking about some of the solutions, the things that help with those things. And really, they start with us as a society understanding that the way that we approach others might have an element of thinking that they think and behave similar to us. And so it really kind of starts out with having an open mind and being aware that that you can't tell just by looking at someone what's going on inside of their brain. And I'll talk a little bit more about other solutions, but that's kind of the general starting point. Next slide, please. All right, so I just want to do a little touching on the notion that neurodiverse individuals tend to have higher rates of trauma than perhaps a typical person. For example, over half of autistic adults are unemployed. And of those that are employed, a little less than half of them are underemployed. And over 3/4 of individuals with autism experience depression or mental health or other anxiety disorders. And go ahead and do the next slide, please. One of the things that underscores this is that there's this constant messaging from folks around them that they're the problem, that their inability to understand others or successfully interact with others is because they're defective and that they deserve it. And so unfortunately, there is a lot of overlap with individuals who are neurodiverse and experiencing trauma and all the things that flow from that, such as mental health disorders and ultimately things like substance misuse and suicide and other just negative mental health and even regular health outcomes. Next slide, please. So one thing I want to offer to this audience is that I believe that our ancestors actually had a much more nuanced and advanced approach to neurodivergent individuals. I believe that they historically saw that as an asset, saw that as a strength. They might have even held positions that were really specialized or revered in their tribes. such as being storytellers or visionaries. And truly, it's arguably, it's only recently meaning in the last couple hundred years, that neurodiversity has been viewed as this negative thing. One thing to maybe mention too is that the way that we have standardized education and trying to kind of push all young people through a very rigid system has resulted in shining a light on the fact that that doesn't really work for everyone. And, you know, prior to that being such a norm, I think that neurodiverse individuals might have been able to find other ways to learn and thrive that didn't result necessarily in the kind of trauma that we might be seeing today in our educational institutions. Next slide, please. So I like this graphic. I'll give you just a moment to read it. So the bottom line with this is that, you know, some of the challenges that come with being a neurodiverse individual is the rejection or the inability for others to meet you where you are and to accept you and support you and even cherish and honor you for the strengths and unique things that you bring to this world. And, you know, sometimes the end result of that, it can be an attitude of feeling like humans can be disappointing. And I will offer that I do hear my son say that more than I wish he would. But that's why we're here today, is to try and make progress in that. Next slide. Another thing I want to just give you some food for thought on today is you might have heard me mixing up the terminology autistic person or person with autism, for example. So similarly to how we might speak of folks and maybe with respect to addiction, where perhaps some of you might know that generally speaking, it's considered more respectful and kind to say person with addiction as opposed to, for example, an addict. And the reason behind that, you know, has a lot to do with not wanting to make the term overshadow the human that, you know, that applies to. When we're talking about neurodiverse conditions, however, I want you to be aware that similarly to how we were talking about how neurodiversity and disability aren't necessarily one and the same. Well, what I'll offer is that you may meet and know people that prefer one or other of the type of labels. And the reason for that, for example, is that some folks that have a diagnosis of autism or ADHD or any of those things, they, because of the desire to want to maybe dispel some of the negative connotations that go with it and to be more accepted, they might wear it like a badge of honor and say, no, I'm an autistic person. There might be other folks that don't want that to be a focus on who they are, but rather just a descriptive term. And so they might prefer person with autism instead. When in doubt, please ask, because each person that you meet that has one of these labels, you know, they may not even have a preference, but if they do, it'd be really helpful and important for you to know that and then and ask that of them. Next slide. All right, so in terms of some additional ways that we can be more inclusive, so you can use multisensory techniques when you're learning and sharing. That means visual, auditorial, physical, hands-on, just all of our learning styles. Break things down into step-by-step instructions. Really challenge what you're not saying. Think about what things are being implied or inferred or just assumed as norms and really break it down. Give people more time to process and think. You know, it's not that they aren't intelligent. It's just that maybe the routes that they need to go take a little bit longer to get there. Be aware that the environment that an individual is in could have a huge impact on their ability to learn, retain information, and stay emotionally regulated. That also it can go both ways, by the way. Some individuals might struggle with too much sensory input, and others might actually really benefit from it. So you're going to have to really be aware that those sensory inputs, sounds, lights, smells, colors, all that are, have the potential to impact individuals differently and uniquely. And lastly, be clear, concise, and straightforward with your language. It'll just really help you be able to communicate with folks. Next slide, please. All right, so in terms of being more inclusive in the education sphere, we just got like 4 things for you to consider. The first is metacognition, which is learning about how we learn. Just understanding that how each individual learns is going to be unique to them, and it may not match what you're used to, and that's okay. Instructors can be provided screening tools to help identify traits of neurodiverse people, and I'll just add really quickly that it's better to focus on the traits than the labels, because that's a whole different situation where you're actually, potentially accidentally trying to diagnose someone, when it's more important to focus on the behavior and what it looks like. Providing toolkits, resources like learning libraries, guides, that sort of thing, can really help instructors know more about neurodiversity and how to help folks that are neurodiverse. And then also just the classroom design, those sensory inputs, again, the lights, the sounds, the structure, the smells, all of that can be really important to consider. Next slide, please. Lastly, we put together an holistic neurodivergent model, so you can just kind of conceive of some of the ways to be a good ally and be supportive of folks in the emotional, social, physical, and spiritual realms. So I'll give you a moment to kind of read what's on this list. But we thought it would be helpful to really just allow you to kind of think of things in that balanced, multi-dimensional way. So that's what I have for you for now. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Nicole.
Thank you so much, Karen. Yeah, lots of food for thought. I've got lots of notes here, so if others are the same, hang on to those and we'll open up the line here in a little bit. I know Nicole's going to talk a little bit about how to identify whether youth has an individual education plan or a 504 plan. But if you're not sure, you can check with your participant's teacher or school. You can schedule a time to meet with them privately. And if you're looking for more support, you can definitely talk to the school counselor, or you can check with your tribal clinic as well. So just a quick note about that. And then we always think that, I always think that I'm really good at taking moments, but when I get busy, I'm less good about taking these moments for myself. So before we pass it over to Nicole, we'll just do a quick movement activity together. So if you'll join me, you can stand if you're able, or you can do this from your seat. And then just stand with your feet hip width apart. Let me move my camera up here, and you can check your feet to make sure they're that distance. And we're just going to roll our shoulders up as we take in a deep breath through our nose, and then we're going to roll them back slowly as we breathe out. And we'll do this 2 more times. So breathe in as you raise your shoulders, breathe out as you slowly roll them down your back. 1 more deep breath in with your shoulders up, and then roll them back as you breathe out. Now we're going to stretch our neck, and you can tuck your chin into your chest, and we're going to hold it there as you breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out for 1, 2, 3, 4. You can slowly bring your head back to neutral. And then we're going to stretch the side of our neck by bringing one ear to your shoulder. And if you need an extra stretch, you can just take your hand and gently have a little deeper stretch. And you can breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. And then slowly bring your head back to center. And then you can do the other side. Breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth. If you want a deeper stretch, you can just gently pull down. And then you can bring your head back to neutral. And then with your hands at your sides, you're going to breathe in as you bend and move your leg towards the ground. Breathing in, and then breathe out as you move to the other side. And we'll do this 2 more times on each side. If you want this to be a little bit faster, you can do this a little bit faster, up to you. And then we're going to take our hands and stretch them in front of us and just roll those wrists that are working on our keyboards and working on our mouse. You can go in one direction, then you can go in the other. If you want to stand on one leg, you can roll your ankle at the same time, move to the other ankle, and then we'll just shake it out. You can shake your legs out. And then just take a deep breath and let it out. All right. Thank you, thank you. And we'll go ahead and pass it over to Miss Nicole, our adaptation guru, to walk us through adaptations in practice.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about adaptations. And a lot of what we're talking about today is things that apply both for neurodivergent youth as well as youth with other disabilities. And so we'll talk through some of the range of what that looks like. For me, myself, I have ADHD. And I do consider it a huge strength. I think a lot of the work I do really lends itself to a person with ADHD. And at the same time, I consider it for myself also a disabling kind of factor in my identity, right? As I try to move through the world and navigate in a world that isn't built for people with ADHD, it does, you do kind of have a heightened awareness of how much of the world isn't created for folks with ADHD or folks with other disabilities. I also have a neurological condition that affects the way I move. And so that has been a learning process for me after being diagnosed a few years ago of learning to see myself as disabled and understanding what that looks like and what that feels like, and how to navigate the world with that identity as well. So we'll dig into the next slide. One of the things I often advise folks to do for the sake of both youth that have experienced trauma as well as youth that may have a disability or may have one of the conditions of neurodivergence that Karen mentioned is to highlight what the process that we're going to undertake looks like at the beginning of, say, a lesson or a activity. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why we should adapt or design for inclusion. We're going to discuss how, so some of the ways and methods that we can use to adapt or design our programs for inclusion. We'll look at a couple of frameworks and methods for shifting some things in our programming. And then we'll also review a few examples from the Native It's Your Game curricula, which is currently going through a revision. And one of the elements we're revising for is disability inclusion. So obviously, we all can't be experts on the full range of disabilities, right? It's a vast, vast range, but it is important that we consider the possibilities and that we hold those possibilities in our mind as we're designing programs or as we're adapting programs for a new school year or a new cohort of young people to create an inclusion for them. So think about some of the needs of youth in your programs in the past, and some of those young people that might have struggled in your programming, and look back as you learn a little more today from both our presenters and your colleagues here on this call. Think about ways that you might have adapted your program to help young people if maybe they had a disability or a condition that you might not have been able to see or tell. Next slide. So in the chat box, or if a couple of you want to unmute, but we'll take a few brief examples or brief comments on this. Why should we adapt or why should we design or adapt programs and services to support neurodivergent youth and youth with disabilities? Let's take a moment to think about what is the why. Yeah, for inclusion. Excellent. Thanks, Alicia. Other thoughts? Yeah, we want to be client-centered. Thanks for that, Sarah. If we want to help our youth, then our interventions need to be tailored to meet their needs. Right answer. When we know more, we know better, we should follow up. We should take action on that. I love that. And to meet people where they are, right? These are things that we often talk about in the scope of programming. And some of the time that conversation centers around Two-Spirit and LGBTQ youth, but youth with disabilities and neurodivergent youth need those same inclusive practices that we're doing for other youth, right? The same way that we build in cultural appreciation and seeing culture as our strength and how we get to a healthy life is connecting with our culture. We want to create those same adaptations for young people so that they see themselves in our programming, so that they feel like we've done all this hard work, right, to create culturally inclusive programs. It would be a real shame if a member of our community was left out. That's not in alignment with our values. It's not in alignment with what we're trying to accomplish for youth of our cultures that we serve in our communities. And so similarly, we want to make sure that all youth are included in our programming. Okay, so let's shift to talking about how to design or adapt for inclusion. So oftentimes we struggle with, where do we get started? This is such a big topic that it can be hard to know where to start. Amanda mentioned earlier asking about IEPs. If you know what an IEP is, add that to the chat box. But IEPs and 504 plans are two plans that you might commonly associate with a school. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Kelsey. They might often are commonly associated with educational services, right? School-based programs, school education kind of oriented things. So if you're not in a school system, you might not have access to that information about the young people in your programming, but you can also ask on an intake form or a registration form, asking parents if their child has an IEP or has a 504. And if they check yes, maybe that's a point for additional conversations. And so those are things that that could help give you a sense for what are some of the things that the school is doing to make sure that this young person feels included and can take part in education actively. And so they can really help guide maybe give you some guidance on some things that would be helpful, or can at least open up a conversation with the parent and with the child about some of the things that will help them participate more fully. You can always ask youth, ask their caregivers about needs and wants. What's going to help you participate fully in this program? What's going to help you feel successful in this program? And then also mentioning to young people that you're open if there's something that you're doing that doesn't help them participate fully or doesn't help them feel included, that they can always talk to you after class and let you know what they need or what would be more helpful for them. So staying open and askable in that way can really help young people come forward and ask for what they need. Planning for inclusivity is really important, right? You should assume that youth in your program might be neurodivergent, might be disabled, whether or not you can see that disability. And think about ways that you can use some of the practices we're talking about to create more inclusion for them in your programming. And then once your programming starts, there's a reason why we would like to start with group agreements, right? That great template Amanda shared at the beginning that we've got as a template you can download gives you an idea of some clear and actionable ground rules to address bullying and to create and cultivate a community that is accepting, is kind, and is inclusive for everyone in the group. So setting those ground rules or group agreements from the beginning really help young people know what the scheme is for your program and know what is expected both from your expectations as well as their expectations from each other. All right, let's go to the next slide. So what are some examples of how you've created an inclusive environment for all youth in your programs, in your classrooms, wherever you engage young people? Feel free to add some of those in the chat box, or if someone has wants to unmute and talk briefly about what they've done in their programs or with their services. We'll take a few of those as well. We might be at a frontier, perhaps. This oftentimes folks may not have made progress in this area, not for a lack of concern or a lack of interest, but because they don't know where to get started or they don't know what the best practices are. So so that's okay. If you haven't made any progress on it, that's okay too. Bianca says, object lessons, group discussions, creating smaller groups so everyone can have a chance to share and ask questions. Yeah, those small groups can really be beneficial for young people that struggle to jump into a bigger conversation, right? Amanda says, classroom design, those clean walls, sound and light considerations. You might see a lot of teachers, maybe at your child's school, that turn off the overhead lights and do kind of lamps around the classroom because fluorescent lights can be really harsh for a lot of young people. I see consistent modeling. Yeah, graphic organizers, so laying out things in a graphic way so people can hear your words, but they can also see graphically what you're talking about. Love that flexibility in the space, adding breaks, multiple modes of how you're delivering information. That's great. Modified for writing. Yeah, excellent. And then listening sessions, daily options, having a variety of activities for solo play, paying close attention to each and every child's unique strengths so that they're able to open doors and invite you're able to open doors and invite their insights into learning. I love that, right? If you know that you've got a storyteller kid in your classroom, as Karen mentioned, they may not be neurodivergent, they might just be a good storyteller, but you might kind of, that little hint might give you a sense for a strength that they have, right, that you might not otherwise have noticed if you didn't create some space for that. Yeah, taking lessons outdoors. I love that, Michelle, so that the expansive nature is really calming and grounding in a way that makes young people feel connected, feel rooted in a different way than maybe our school structures or our program office structures make them feel. Excellent, excellent ideas. Thank you, everyone, for sharing there. Can we go to the next slide? So as we shift to thinking about some of the adaptations that you might consider and how you might make some adaptations in your program or in your services, think about the full range of disabilities, right? And you can kind of do some Googling to give you a sense for maybe disabilities that you might not be thinking of, or different orientations like neurodivergence that you might not be thinking of. But some things to consider, things like hearing, speaking, seeing, learning and processing information, mobility and movement, including hand dexterity, mental health, health treatments, right? If a young person has a chronic medical condition or chronic disability, they might miss a little bit more of your programming or a little bit more of your educational program because they've got to partake in health treatments that other youth don't have to. And then executive function, so their ability to just function and kind of make decisions and take action and be kind of organized and things like that. Not all youth have the same capability on that front. So some adaptations to consider. And in the first one there, you see reading and listening adaptations. So previewing vocabulary, including some of your cultural words, is always a nice practice. That could be sent digitally ahead of time, or it could be providing a handout with vocabulary words or other content. Using auto captions. If you use Google Slides, even if you're in the classroom as opposed to a digital environment like this, you can toggle on and off auto captions, which are better than nothing, right? Smartphones also get a bad rap because a lot of educators forget that smartphones have a lot of accessibility tools. So don't assume that because a young person is got their phone out that they're, you know, just browsing the internet or on social media. They might be. It's a likely scenario that they are, but they might also be using an auto caption or a magnifier feature that they need. Visual and sensory adaptations. You'll notice we really tried to create larger fonts on these slides and a solid background on them so that the design of the background of the slides, the beautiful, colorful watermarks that we've got there are wonderful. And at the same time, they can make content a little bit harder to read. Using, you know, high contrast font. So think black text on white paper, that's a high contrast. Any light color text on a dark background or dark text on a light background, that really helps create good contrast. Let's go to the next slide. And then some physical space adaptations. Classrooms today are really get me because they really don't allow for youth that might really struggle to move, say, in a straight line or move in a way that youth without disabilities can move. You know, so think about as you lay out your program, lay out your classroom, your services, make sure there's ample space for the full range of movement that that young people might have, but also allow people to stand up, to pace around, to rock a little bit. Being able to move like that creates a nice opportunity for someone to meet that like physical need that they have while listening to you. They don't have to be seated still just to hear what you're saying. Amanda mentioned earlier, I think the decluttered walls, the more sparse kind of layout of things so that you're not overloading with sensory input. And then some other adaptations that you might think about, flexibility in your tardiness policy, right? Not all youth, particularly people with ADHD, not all people with ADHD can get places on time. Some can, and some really struggle in that department. Sending text reminders or reminding of what's due that day can be really helpful as well. And then rope in your caregivers, your parents, the family members of youth that you're working with. Think about the pacing and checks for understanding. All these things can be really helpful at creating a more inclusive space. All right, let's go to the next one. I mentioned in a few of the bullets some things like colored overlays. Those are colored kind of plastic sheets you can put over a sheet of paper. And a lot of youth really take well to those colored sheets that make it easier to read. Similarly, reading guide strips let you read one line at a time and move across your paper so that you can focus on just one line at a time for those that have lines kind of get blurry when they're looking at any content. And then wobble cushions. These are 3 really inexpensive tools that I think most youth programs could afford. But wobble cushions are like a little inflatable kind of disc that young people can sit on that allows them to move a little bit more and move more while staying in a seat if that's easier. All right, let's go to the next slide. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking universal design, but just to introduce a few frameworks, and then we've got some handouts on this that we'll share with you all. Thanks, Taylor. Let's go to the next slide. So universal design principles are principles that were developed back in, I think, 97 by architects, product designers, and engineers, environmental design researchers at North Carolina State University. And these are principles that are developed that can apply to lots of different things, from how we design a building to how we design our educational programs. So universal design is a really great term to search and look up some of the links that we're sharing and the handouts that we're sharing to learn a little bit more about how some of these come into play. And let's go to the next one. There's an adaptation on universal design called Universal Design in Learning. And I love this framework because it's really specifically around how we take universal design and apply it to education or apply it to learning opportunities. And I think there's a lot of really helpful, beneficial tools and resources at the link that Taylor just shared in the chat box that we can learn from and use to help take the thinking out of it for you. We won't go into it too much today, but let's look at the next slide. I'll just highlight really quickly. You can see that this framework, this is a screenshot, so apologies that it's not readable, but you've got the link there, and we'll share the handout as well that you can look at this more deeply. But it's organized into 3 columns and 3 rows. So at the top, design multiple means of engagement, design multiple means of representation, and then design multiple means of action and expression. And then on the rows, you can see you've got access, support, and executive function. So all of these, there's at the intersection of each of these columns and rows, there's guidance on that website for ways that you can adapt your program. And a lot of the guidance is very specific things that you can do that kind of takes the guesswork out of the process. So more food for thought. For the sake of time, we'll move on to the next slide. So adaptation and practice, we have been working on the Native It's Your Game curricula. I think we've got a few Native It's Your Game educators that are doing this program with their middle school youth in their communities. And Native It's Your Game is in its 2nd version. And we are currently adapting to create the 3rd version of Native It's Your Game. So I'll talk a little bit about some concrete examples of what we've done on Native It's Your Game, and we'll be releasing that new version soon. Make sure you subscribe to the Healthy Native Youth newsletter so you get notified when it gets released. Next slide. So we did a really thorough look at the program, and we came up with some key themes. A lot of the themes had centered around improving contrast and readability of written content. So font size, color, background images, that sort of thing. There were sensory things like strobing, flashing lights, things like that that can be really hard for youth with migraines, epilepsy, even neurodivergent youth struggle in that area as well. Adjusting volumes and sound, so that, again, another sensory thing, shifting dings and buzzers on games to a little bit softer sound so that they're not so overwhelming. Trying to create some clarity in instructions so that it's more perceivable what the expectation is for youth to do in any given activity. Adding captions and transcripts, that's going to be a work in progress. I don't know that we'll be able to get that done on this one. Captioning without auto captions, regular captioning can be a very expensive endeavor to build in for a program that's got a lot of videos. So that may be a future piece that we'll build in. And then decreasing physical effort required for activities. So minimizing like excessive clicking for youth with dexterity issues. Dragging and dropping actually requires a lot of coordination of movement. So trying to simplify some of those activities. And then increasing timing or reducing the speed of things so that there's greater tolerance for error and adjusting some of the negative feedback that you get when you, say, put in the wrong answer. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to show you a few examples, direct screenshots from the program and what we've done on each of these things. So this is an example of changing the font. You can see on the Native It's Your Game 2.0 version, we've got kind of almost like a script font on a little bit of a complicated background and then a really teeny tiny font. And it's as hard to read on if you're looking at the program full screen as it is on your screen right now. Shifting to 3.0, we shifted to a more standardized font and created a larger font on that bottom end, so it's a little bit easier to see and understand. Let's look at the next slide. In this activity, we shifted from a more kind of chaotic, difficult to read background to a more neutral background with simplified, higher contrast font. You'll see we also shifted the graffiti wall look to a more native design developed by Taylor Dean, Healthy Native Youth's resident, amazing artist. And so we did sort of a cultural adaptation here as well as a disability adaptation. Next slide. Similarly, in a lot of the activities in Native It's Your Game, we're asking youth to kind of process by typing in responses to questions or to prompts. So the prompt here says, type in your favorite saying or quote. You can see on the left side, I said, hi, this is my favorite quote, but it's really hard to read because there's also writing behind it, right? So the letters all really jumble together. And then on the right side, you can see we've added what's called a container. So we've created a solid background for them to type into so that they can fully see what they're typing in. And then we've shifted fonts to a more standardized font just to allow for easier readability. Next slide. And then we've, on this one, we've tried to make a little more simplified and intuitive. So when I got to the one on the left, before I selected something, I had no idea what this was asking me to do. So we shifted on the example on the right to when you hover over one of these options, it highlights in a different way from the other options. It also, instead of crossing out what was wrong, you can see these two have X marks, those are wrong. The one at the bottom is right, but you can still see the difference between them and read what's different between the right answer and the wrong answer. Let's go to next slide. We've also added some characters with disabilities. So you can see the character in the first row on the right side is the same character, but now that character's in a wheelchair. And so it just is like a little bit of a adaptation for helping young people with disabilities see themselves in the program, just like we want the characters to be Native. And so Native youth can see themselves in the program. We want youth with disabilities to see themselves in the program. So you could do something similar with the art that you select. This is another example. This is a young person with visual, disability that that has a cane and it's got sunglasses. Looks really good. Also notice who the artwork is by there. Also Taylor helped us redesign to make the house look a little more Native. And then another piece that we did was to make on some of the activities, there would be a say 3 seconds of time to select something, but you were having to do that. You're discerning a social situation, which might be hard for, say, an autistic youth to do. But then there was also background party music, a countdown clock, and then the little marquee on the side was like flashing lights. So it was total sensory overload. And then if you didn't do it in time, you got this message that said, you have to think faster than that. It's meant to be kind of playful, right? But if you struggle with the speed of that you can do things with, it really could be a more supportive way, right? So we shifted this to make the marquee is now not strobing or flashing, it's solid. We ask if they run out of time, we ask, do you need more time? And they select yes, they can have a little more time to figure out what's going on in this social scene. And we also dropped the background music to make it a little bit lighter so that it's easier for young people to focus. So those are a few of our edits on the Native It's Your Game program. A lot of this hopefully is food for thought, even if you're not doing a digital program with youth. There are a lot of things that you can do so that disabled youth and neurodivergent youth are included and feel like they see themselves in the program and they see ways that you're working in for them to participate a little more fully with less frustration and feel like they belong in your program. And I'll turn over to Amanda.
Well, yay, just big round of applause to both Karen and Nicole and to all of the really great feedback and responses and input into the chat feed. So thank you all for the excellent participation and it's nice seeing all the visuals side by side and actually seeing all those adaptations in action. But yeah, now we've got some time if folks want to unmute their lines, if you have questions for Karen or Nicole, or if you want to throw one out to the group. Yeah, this is our time to just chat. So feel free to unmute your line, or you can use the chat feature as well to add in your question or comments. Yes, lots of thank yous to Nicole and Karen.
This is Michelle.
Yeah, so cool, Taylor, to see all the artwork that you did.
Yes, this is Michelle, and I just want to say thank you, because to see this side by side, like to understand, the tutorial and the overview that Karen provided was so very helpful to not only me, but I'm sure many, many others in here to really understand, the just to be able to understand language, but just also to what we might be seeing amongst our families, our relatives, our students, even individuals. And, and I just love the comments that, we do this, the why is so we can meet people where they're at, that we're all in this together, that we are community, we are one. And then, of course, to see the examples with Native at Your Game 3.0, yeah, I mean, to really see it in contrast, like how little things can make such a big difference for a learner or just anyone. Thank you so much. This really was just truly a very outstanding presentation to see the differences that I'm coming away with more enlightened and informed. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Does anyone have any questions or comments? You've got wonderful resources here.
I did see somebody raise their hand during Nicole's.
Thanks. I think that was Vanessa. Vanessa, did you want to unmute your line, or you can use the chat if you'd like?
Oh yeah, sure. When you were showing those these tools for the classroom, one of the things was a color overlay. I missed how that is helpful for someone.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, a lot of, I think they're often used for young people that have dyslexia or dyscalculia, and one of those that can make it really tough. So for a lot of young people, they don't see the words that are, say, printed on a page that look perfectly straight and normal to you might look like a real jumble to them. And so I don't know exactly how it works, but I do know they're used very frequently for youth with dyslexia, and they can just make it a lot easier to read and to kind of focus on the content in front of you.
Huh. So, and the color just depends on the person, which one it helps see things better.
Right. Yeah. I think that some youth respond a little bit better to some colors than others. And so oftentimes they're sold as a set with a range of colors. So youth could try out a few different overlays to try out what works for them. And I saw a hand raised. I don't know if that was someone that maybe has a better answer than I have.
I think Kelsey maybe has a clinical background, or Kelsey, you can unmute your line. Yeah.
That was just a cool idea that I hadn't seen before.
And they're really cheap. A lot of these packs, that they cost maybe $10 for a pack of say 7 different colors. So they're really inexpensive, and could be something to try if you notice that someone's having a little bit more of a struggle in reading.
Can you hear me?
On that note too, I was going to mention it might be of interest for folks on here to just play with your settings too. I'm very light sensitive, and I can get screen sick after being on computers. So I make sure my glasses have anti-fatigue and blue ray blocking lenses as well, or in the lenses. But I also play with my contrast on my computer settings too. So that might just be kind of interest to you. And then also Karen and Nicole gave lots of tips about trying out different tools. So playing with the auto captions. It's just good to have experience so that if a youth does need help, then you can, like, oh yeah, yep, I checked that out, and here's how you can do that. So just some tips to just kind of play around with settings.
We have a comment or a question from Kelsey. Kelsey, take it away.
It wasn't a question, it was to respond to the question about why the colors change and how that helps students read better. So there are a series of different like cones and rods in your eyeballs that perceive like what is in front of you. So it takes in every form of visual stimuli that you have in front of you, and then it transmits that to your brain, which sends it back. So you have to be able to make sense of that. Now, originally, when your eyes take in sight, it's upside down, and your brain and your eyes work together to autocorrect it. And that's automatic for every person, just about. So what those different color lenses do is they change the way in which your brain takes in stimuli. So it either reduces something that might be agitating to a student, or it provides a kind of background stimulation so their brain can focus on just the reading part and not sensing out more sensory, or not seeking out more sensory experiences to try and compensate for that need. So depending on your student, the colors will change, and depending on their need, the colors will change, because you're also capable of changing settings on PowerPoint settings and telephones and all those different things to accommodate for students who have color blindness, who have depth perception troubles. Like, so it does vary student to student. It is something that like there are some colors that are recommended more so than others, depending on like what that student is working with. But just in general, like every single one is a little bit different, and giving them that option of flipping through a few to see which one feels best for their eyes. It's like when you try a pair of glasses or sunglasses for the first time and you're like, this is fine. And then 5 minutes later, you're like, oh my gosh, this is too tight. It's hurting my face. It's hurting my nose. Like I can't do it. It is that exact same process, just without it being glasses on your face, essentially.
Yay, Kelsey, thank you. Awesome. I think we have time for a couple more questions if anyone else wants to unmute their line. Karen, I did want to ask you, you had shared something during one of our planning calls, and I think others might find it helpful too. We did talk very briefly on maybe how to refer, and especially when, yeah, some youth go long times, and family members, you know, not until college were diagnosed with dyslexia and things like this. And you did offer to share this personal experience as well. But yeah, if you are someone on the outside and you're maybe observing youth that you work with, or another person's child or relative, and you may have, you know, some concerns or maybe some suspicions that there might be something that needs to be looked at a little bit more. Do you have any suggestions for folks on how they might go about that? You know, it's a very sensitive thing, and we want to make sure we're doing things that are in a caring, non-judgmental way. So I was wondering if you could offer maybe a little insight into that.
Sure, yeah, happy to. Appreciate the opportunity just to chat a bit about that. So, part of my personal story is that my son, who's now almost 16, um, he started on the path to a diagnosis of autism around the age of 2 3/4. But that was following a period of just things perking up on my radar, particularly around how he was handling being at the daycare center that he was in. I actually had him at the Portland State University Children's Center while I was getting my second bachelor's in human resources. And at any rate, one of the things that really stuck with me over time was a particular interaction I had with another parent who approached me towards the end of, I guess, the school year, and following on my side what was a nearly year-long process of going from suspicions that something wasn't quite right to a referral from a physician, and then ultimately a diagnosis from a specialist. And this other parent approached me because on their own, they had witnessed and observed behaviors in my own child that to them, because of their attuning with their own experience and knowledge, they were able to essentially go, oh, yeah, I think that child probably has autism. And at the same time, she had held off from approaching me with that information simply because she understood and knew that it wouldn't potentially be well received and that it ideally needed to be something that that I kind of figured out on my own path, or at least got most of the way there. And two things stuck out for me with that particular experience. And the first is I remember, especially at the time, being kind of dumbstruck that someone who was a perfect stranger could clearly see in my own child something that had taken me, arguably at that point in time, years to see, observe, and then ultimately accept. Because when you're not experienced in it and it's new territory for you, it's not really going to necessarily be something that you're aware of or attuned to. But also that she had the conscientiousness to wait to approach me until she had discerned that I had enough of the baseline information to be receptive to the help and support that she was offering. And so I share that simply because, I'm on the other side of that now, very much so. I have found myself being in situations where I might have be able to clearly see that there's some kind of neurodivergence or need that someone else's child or young person has or is experiencing. And so, you as folks out there that are working with youth on the regular, you might be attuned to those things. And you can definitely offer support and assistance and guidance and all of those things to the parents and caregivers that are taking care of those kiddos. But it's also important to maybe just understand that the way that you approach them benefits from some nuance in that that individual is on their own path with their own understanding of their child. And for good or for bad, some of these conditions are highly stigmatized. And bottom line is that if you approach another parent and say, hey, I think your kid might be autistic, the odds of that being well received out the gate aren't necessarily super high. But that doesn't mean that you can't be empathetic or supportive or just even offer to be a friendly and listening ear to those individuals. And at the same time, maybe point them towards resources that might nudge them a little bit on their path. So yeah, just a personal anecdote to share about my own experience and maybe something that might help you as you interact with the kiddos out there that you're supporting and helping and their families.
Well, I thank you all for the care and the intention that you put towards this planning for a really wonderful and awesome resource for folks. We're going to wrap it up now. So in closing, we just want to remind folks that if you haven't been to the Healthy Native Youth website, please, as Michelle Singer likes to say, just get lost in it, click all the buttons, look at all the resources. Everything that we talk about is here or it's on Native Health Resources. So if you want to order anything, I think Michelle put that in the link or in the chat higher up, but I'll ask Taylor to maybe put Healthy Native Youth in and then Native Health Resources as well. Another really great resource for Native youth is We Are Native. So this is our multimedia health resource that you can share with youth. Of course, we're on all the socials. We have Ask Your Relative, which is a Q&A service. We're getting guest celebs to answer youth questions. So we had Dallas Goldtooth just answer some, Quanah Chasing Horse just answered some questions with her mom, Jody Potts Joseph. So we're in the process of editing and getting those out on our socials. But really great resource for Native youth in the lower 48. And then I Know Mine is the Alaska Native version. So if you have youth in Alaska, you can share this resource. They have I Want the Kit, at home STI and HIV testing kits, home testing kits. Really wonderful resource for folks up in Alaska. And then if you aren't getting the newsletter, you want to take your phone out real quick, you can scan the QR code here and you can sign up to stay up to date with all the latest and the greatest. Michelle Singer and Taylor put those out every month. Really wonderful resource to have. And then if you haven't been able to tell, we just love helping and we just love the work that we do. So if you're looking for any technical assistance, yep, please hit us up. We love hearing feedback after these sessions. So if there are things that you want a little bit more of, a little bit less of, they're super helpful for us during our planning for the next session. So please take a moment and you can fill out a TA request form, or you can send back some feedback after this session. And then mark your calendars. Oh goodness, I think this is an old one. Yep. So we'll put the new one up there, but mark your calendars. So next month, Taylor, I'm not sure, maybe we can put the community of practice link up into the chat so folks can see what the next line or next session is. But it's the second Wednesday of every month at 10 Pacific Standard Time. And then just a big thank you. Project Red Talon is the larger team. We have the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, the Intertribal Council of Arizona, Johns Hopkins Center for Indigenous Health, Southern Plains Tribal Health Board, the University of Texas School of Public Health, and then of course we're out of the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. But a really big thank you to, yeah, we don't do any of this alone. It's a collective and team effort. And then right on time, we're going to close out with the blessing. Ishtom ho ichima. I cherish each of you, but Taylor will close us out with a blessing for today's session.
Just want to thank everybody for being here and being so engaged in a good way. I am so blessed to be a part of this team. I'm so happy that we get to share this space with each other. I hope everybody takes care of themselves today, takes some time to make sure that they prioritize themselves, because the work that we do is very difficult. Thank you so much for coming. I raise my hands to you all.
Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye.